Hi, everyone, and welcome to the Colorado State University Prevention Extension Cast, where today we'll be discussing the connections, intersections, and opportunities for collaboration between the fields of social work and prevention science. I'm Dr. Nate Riggs. I use he, him pronouns. I'm the Executive Director of the CSU Prevention Research Center. I'm joining you from my office on CSU's campus in Alder Hall, where I'm happy to be joined by Dr. Ann Williford. Dr. Williford is an associate professor and doctoral program director in the School of Social Work here at Colorado State University. By way of introduction, Dr. Williford received her PhD in social work from the University of Denver in 2009, and throughout her career has investigated the etiology of youth violence, particularly emphasizing ecological factors that contribute to the development, maintenance, and maintenance of aggressive and violent behaviors in peer, school, family, and community settings. So really taking this social ecological approach. A critical aim of her scholarship is to identify effective prevention and intervention strategies to mitigate aggressive behavior and promote positive behavioral health outcomes in young people. So Dr. Williford is the co-lead of a workforce development task force for the Coalition for the Promotion of Behavioral Health, which is one of the 12 grand challenges for social work. In this role, she is co-leading an effort to train social work students in prevention science, policy, and practice. Dr. Williford is an associate editor for the Journal for the Society of Social Work and Research, and is on the editorial boards of the Journal of Youth and Adolescence and Social Work Research. Dr. Williford's teaching interests include community practice and advanced research methods. And last but not least, she's a Prevention Research Center faculty affiliate, where the two of us are working together with other colleagues to scale up school-based prevention across Larimer County. Ann, how are you doing today?
All right, thanks, Nate. It is just wonderful to be here with all of you. I'm so excited to have this conversation. I've thought a lot about the intersections of social work with prevention and excited to dive into the questions you have for me today.
Wonderful. All right, so before we get going though, now for those of you who have yet to join us for a Prevention Extension Cast, here's how it works. I'll be moderating a 45-minute Q&A with Dr. Williford about the intersections between social work and prevention science. After that, we'll have some time for Ann to respond to any questions that emerge from the audience. So throughout our conversation today, please feel free to enter those questions into the Teams Live Q&A. It should be up in the upper right-hand corner of your screen. And then what I'll do is I'll relay those questions to Ann near the end of the cast. So feel free to do that at any point during the conversation. And as always, I'd like to thank the USDA and the National Institute of Food and Agriculture for providing funding to support the Prevention Extension Cast. So let's get started. All right, Ann, the first question that I have for you today is that, well, it's a statement and then a question. Some may not see an intuitive link between prevention science and social work. What are some of the differences between the two fields?
Yeah, that's a really great question, Nate. So social work as a profession was really developed in the late 1800s, early 1900s to address some of the most pressing social problems that were being experienced in our nation and across the globe. We're certainly not the only nation that has social work as a predominant field to address human suffering. But really at our beginning and to today, we are a broad field that really seeks to address individual and social problems at the individual, family, and community levels. And so within that kind of scope of practice, oftentimes you find social workers working in systems of care. So we have a long history working in child protective services and public schools and community mental health and the criminal legal system. And so what we've found is that prevention actually represents only a small portion of the work that we typically do as social workers. And so that's actually been a bit of a challenge in terms of really helping people in our field understand the place of prevention science when we're oftentimes working in systems where prevention may not actually be the goal or may not be central to the mission of that kind of system. So in child welfare practice, for example, we're oftentimes intervening with families after allegation of abuse or neglect. And my argument, which I'll make throughout this podcast, is that prevention, I think, can have a much stronger fit within social work practice, particularly even in systems that may not be designed with that in mind.
Excellent. So you alluded to this a little bit, but in what ways do you see prevention science and social work overlapping?
One of the, I think, most important ways that I see an overlap is with the person and environment perspective that is pervasive in our field. So a lot of our training, a lot of our thinking about our practice is really rooted in social ecological thinking, so that we situate individuals within their environment. We understand and try to seek solutions not only at that individual level, but at these different ecological levels. So we're really trying to understand how people experience their environment, and looking across that. And so another, I think, overlapping kind of theoretical perspective is around this risk and protective factor framework, so that we're understanding risk at that individual level. We're trying to understand how that risk is also present within families or communities, schools, peer relationships, and also looking at protective factors and what helps to promote well-being among families and among individuals and among communities. So definitely that intersection between social ecological thinking, the risk and protective factor framework. So really at the root, we're trying to understand that etiology piece. We're really trying to understand what is causing individuals to experience suffering in their lives. So looking at also what promotes behavioral health, what promotes physical health. So because social work is so broad and we work in so many different types of systems, we really are using these frameworks to understand root causes of social and individual problems across these different kind of systems of care, if you will. I think another really interesting overlap is that we are an applied profession. And so our training is really meant for our practitioners to go out and meet the needs of individuals, families, and communities. And we do that kind of in two ways. So we do that through direct practice, so we're actually providing services to people. And we also do that in community practice, which is one of my expertise in terms of my teaching, really looking at how we seek to solve individual and social problems at that larger macro level through changing systems, through policy advocacy. But really the point being that we are seeking to translate research into building out interventions that help individuals and help communities. So that intervention translational research piece, I think, is really another interesting overlap with prevention science. And, because of just the root of our profession being rooted and situated in public systems, I think that another interesting overlap is really this idea of collaborating with these public systems to solve problems. And I know that's also, one thing that I've seen as a potential overlap with prevention science too, that we're bringing these tools to systems of care, into public health, into public schools, into communities, to help them understand how to, solve problems collectively. So there's certainly a lot of integration in social work in public systems, and I see that as a really nice overlap with prevention science as well.
Yeah, I love that. I love that about social work and prevention science, and it really kind of shines through in your work. And one of the things I've been really happy to partner with you in these projects, and really translating science, not science for the sake of science. It's science to promote health and well-being and reduce suffering. So that was great. I loved hearing that. Okay, so what do you think are a few things that the two fields can learn from each other? So what are some unique perspectives that social work can bring to prevention science and vice versa?
That's a great question. So, one thing I'd like to note, and kind of this is back to your last question about where's some overlap, is this idea of public health framing, this coming from this risk and protective factor framework, understanding these, kind of ecological environments and how that influences individuals and their, human experiences. But one thing that I think is really unique to our profession, so we are a value-based profession, and so we have a set of governing principles and ethical principles and values that govern our practice. And one of the most central values in our profession is social justice. And so what we're really trying to seek, not only to alleviate human suffering at that individual or family level, but one of the reasons that we focus so much on the community or that larger macro system is we understand that systems are inherently oftentimes oppressive. And so the more that we seek to understand how systems create structures and create practices and policies that then marginalize marginalize certain groups of individuals and communities and our society, the better that we can actually seek to alleviate human suffering at that individual level. So we focus very much so, and I've only seen this trend grow in recent years, on issues around diversity, equity, and inclusion, that we're asking questions about social injustice. We're asking questions about how systems need to be redesigned, reimagined, if not abolished, for the sake of alleviating social injustice and promoting equity. Because of that, I think one of the, ways in which we see ourselves is very different. Not that we have the market on this, but, a big part of what we seek to do is not just, again, at that direct practice level, but really engaging that macro system. So engaging in policy advocacy, not only within, say, a state or federal system, but also within systems of care, within agencies that are, seeking to meet the needs of their community. So focusing on that macro arena, I think is something really interesting and unique, and was really honestly a big draw for me into the field. I was looking for a field where I could combine my interest in working with children, but also really wanting to do something about the systems that I saw that were unfairly marginalizing certain groups of people in our nation. And so social work, I read, I think, a short blurb when I was applying to master's programs, and I thought, that's it. So social justice is also what we see as kind of a big driver of who joins our profession, both at the undergraduate, master's, and doctoral levels, that they really are seeking solutions to try to dismantle systems of oppression.
Great, thank you. Okay, so then, given that there's a lot of opportunity for prevention science and social work research to collaborate, what challenges do you see as barriers to that collaboration between the two fields?
Yeah, that's a really great question. And I know I alluded to this, and even my first response is that historically, social workers have been very deeply embedded in community systems, like child welfare, community mental health, public schools, that don't necessarily always have this prevention orientation. So oftentimes we are not prepared to adopt a prevention framework in our own practice. Oftentimes as social workers, we're intervening after a family, an individual, or a community has experienced a very significant problem that really truly does need a more extensive and expensive intervention. So while we're embedded in these systems, and even if we train some of our folks, like I always seek the opportunity in my classes to give a little shout out to prevention and offer some tools. And at the same time, most often our students and then our, who become our practitioners are working in systems where that's not very easy to pursue. We're focused on, again, human suffering that's already been exacerbated. So oftentimes because of that, social workers lack the training in some of the fundamental principles of prevention science, because so much of their work, again, is taking place and will continue to take place with these more time-intensive and costly interventions that are required when problems have reached that, kind of threshold of despair, if you will. So because of that, I think we're also a little behind the times in terms of, or maybe have missed some opportunities to embed more prevention science training in our undergraduate and master's programs in particular. So those are really the degrees, and I'll talk a little bit more about this later on, but the degrees in our profession that are out there in the trenches, working in systems of care, providing direct services to individuals, families, and communities. So if we're not priming our students to understand where prevention science could intersect with their practice in these different systems, then they're not prepared to really pursue some of those options. I think we've had more success in public schools, and I think in large part that's been because public schools are adopting, like Nate, the project that I'm excited that I'm working with you on, the public schools are adopting prevention programming in their schools to try to prevent behavioral health problems like substance misuse, violence and aggression, mental health and suicidality. So when we're priming these folks to go out into these other systems, I think we need to think about, what are the tools that are going to help folks understand where a prevention lens could come into play, no matter what system they're working in. I think because of that, when we look at, say, our PhD training in social work, PhDs in social work are often focused on research and education. So becoming, successful scholars, becoming effective classroom instructors, that we're not bringing people into those degree programs that have an interest in prevention science. And so because of that, I think also our research in this space has been lagging other allied disciplines. So kind of in large part, I think what we need to do to fix this is certainly increase the educational content across degree programs and social work on prevention, really thinking about the application of these fundamental principles at different areas of practice. And we also need to expand social work's larger role in prevention advocacy, policy, and research.
Great, thank you. And I also appreciate you recommending the HCFS 607 prevention science course that I'm teaching in the fall. So that is much appreciated as well. Okay, so what are some projects where collaboration between social work and prevention science has worked well in your experience? And what do you think are the the core ingredients to a successful partnership between prevention scientists and social work researchers or practitioners?
Yeah, I think that's a really great question. I think, one of the main things that comes to mind I just mentioned is about how we are oftentimes working as school social workers in K through 12 schools. And that's really an environment that I think is rich with opportunities to implement prevention programming across different grade levels. And so we've definitely seen some, I think, successful partnerships, collaborations, and implementations of prevention programming in public schools, where we see school social workers working alongside prevention specialists and other mental health professionals in the schools to provide, programming either at the universal level for students, regardless of their level of risk, or at, higher levels of risk with these more targeted interventions. So certainly school social workers, I would say, are having some of the maybe greatest opportunity in our field to work in this prevention space and collaborate with prevention scientists. We also have social workers who are working in public health systems, in health departments, and therefore are getting exposed to and becoming actively involved in some of the prevention systems, like I know, Nate, that you research on around Prosper and Communities That Care. And so, these prevention systems that are really bringing together a large group of community members that work in different spaces to try to understand where risk is occurring for young people and how we then select and implement interventions to help to prevent some of those issues that are arising for young people. So certainly, I've been many years ago was able to participate in some of the CTC efforts here in Larimer County and saw social workers there, from the public health system, from the public schools. And so really thinking about, bringing these community level prevention systems together, I think creates those opportunities for folks like social workers and prevention specialists and scientists to work together. As I know you mentioned in my bio, which felt quite long when you were reading it, but thank you for all those nice things you said about me. But I've been actively involved in the Coalition for the Promotion of Behavioral Health in Social Work, which is a direct response to the 12 grand challenges that social work established about 7 or 8 years ago. And our coalition is really far-reaching. While it was kind of birthed out of social work, we certainly have reached across the aisle to all kinds of allied disciplines, because when we're thinking about the promotion of behavioral health for young people, we're thinking about the intersection of social work and prevention science and public health. And so we've involved folks from all of these different allied disciplines to try to look for both practice and policy solutions for behavioral health problems. So, for example, one of the activities that we've been involved with as a leadership group is actually looking for opportunities at the state level to create strategic visions and strategic plans to infuse prevention practice across state systems. So for example, our coalition has been involved in some of the kind of co-creation, and Nate, I believe you were involved in these efforts too, the co-creation of a strategic plan around behavioral health in the state. And so how do we bring together different public systems in this prevention space? And so that coalition has been really an exciting thing to be a part of in terms of looking for how social workers interface and collaborate, particularly around building these systems of prevention, even in systems that may not be necessarily designed with that kind of framework in mind.
Wonderful. So we are about halfway through the formal interview with Dr. Williford. And so it's at this point where I always like to remind our audience that you're welcome to drop any kind of questions for our guest, Dr. Williford, in the Q&A. So that's an opportunity. So all right, so Anne, you mentioned your role in the Coalition for the Promotion of Behavioral Health and how it's related to the 12 grand challenges for social work. Can you tell me a little, or tell our audience a little bit more about what those 12 grand challenges are and what role prevention science may play in this work?
Yeah, that's a great question. So, starting about, I'd say 15 years ago, the field started to really wrestle with just the kind of breadth of human suffering and how social work was really trying to tackle, such a wide range and such a far-reaching set of social problems. And so as a profession, there were lots of different folks that came together to try to understand what is we as a profession really want to stand up and say, these are the most pressing social problems that our profession should seek to solve in the next, I think we had an ambitious goal of 20 years. And so there was, again, lots of different people involved in this. And it's really been kind of this way to catalyze the field around these 12 grand challenges to champion social progress powered through science. And so really trying to connect that translational piece with the kinds of solutions that we were seeking for these particular social problems. And we really saw it as a call to action for us to work together to tackle some of the nation's most pressing social problems. And we kind of grouped these 12 challenges around three large, broad areas, one being advancing individual and family well-being, another being building a stronger social fabric and creating a just society. So kind of, again, bringing together some of the core values of the profession around service, around social justice. And so, for example, I've been actively involved in the grand challenge connected to the Coalition for the Promotion of Behavioral Health, which is to ensure the healthy development of youth. And some of that's kind of housed in this larger area around individual and family well-being. And so some of our other grand challenges in that particular bucket include closing the health gap, building healthy relationships to end violence. When we're thinking about a stronger social fabric, some of the grand challenges under that umbrella are to eradicate social isolation and homelessness, create social responses to a changing environment. So we've got a kind of growing interest in the intersection of climate change and social injustice. And last, a just society, we have a couple like eliminating racism, promoting smart decarceration, reducing extreme economic inequality. So as you can tell, we really set the bar very high. So when I said we set an ambitious goal of solving these in 10 to 20 years, we really have devoted a lot of energy into these 12 grand challenges because we see them as so vital to the health and well-being of our society.
Definitely thinking big.
Yes.
All right, so shifting gears a little bit towards more School of Social Work specific questions. Among your many roles here at CSU is that you're the Director of Graduate Programs in the School of Social Work. Can you tell us a bit more about CSU's graduate programs in social work?
Yeah, absolutely. So in our graduate programs, we have both the master's in social work and the PhD in social work. I direct the PhD program in social work, and my fabulous colleague, Amy Martonis, directs our master's in social work program. So just to differentiate those, I know I've given a little information about that. Our master's in social work is really seen as our terminal practice degree in social work. So those who are pursuing the MSW are seeking to go out and provide direct services to families or engage at that macro level by engaging in policy advocacy or other types of system change work. So our master's program is training folks in direct practice, community practice, policy advocacy. And our particular master's program adopts what's called a generalist approach. Other programs are much more specialized, where you can specialize in like direct practice or clinical practice, or you can specialize in policy advocacy. We adopt a generalist approach because we really believe that our master's level trained folks will and should work across different levels of practice. So I might start in clinical practice, but only find myself to be engaging in policy advocacy. So we want our students to have a broad set of skills. Our PhD in social work is a research and teaching degree. So we are really seeking to train our students to be stewards of the discipline. So producing science that helps advance our field in some meaningful way. And we also want to train them in being effective classroom instructors at both the undergraduate and the graduate levels. We also have what's called a doctorate in social work, which we don't have here at CSU, but that's an advanced practice degree that some schools are adopting. But the PhD in social work is really geared towards understanding, research, and teaching.
Right, thank you. I dropped a few links in the Q&A for you to follow if you're interested to those graduate programs. All right, 2 more questions. So we're coming up on your last chances to ask Dr. Williford some questions from the audience. What kinds of employment opportunities are there for students trained at the School of Social Work? You mentioned a couple of them, but maybe you could expand a bit.
Yeah, so we have a very active bachelor's in social work degree program as well. And so many of our students actually have dual degrees with human development and family studies. So we have certainly a lot of folks pursuing both of those degrees. Our BSW students are most often moving into public systems like in child welfare, maybe being a caseworker, working in public schools, maybe supporting students who are in receiving special education services, working in community systems, maybe trying to meet the needs of folks experiencing houselessness. Our master's students, again, are much more, kind of the advanced clinical practitioner, community practitioner that may be providing, individualized therapy services, so working in private practice. Many of these master level trained folks are also working in these public systems. Oftentimes we do find that our master's trained folks are working in policy advocacy, so either as some of our state and local social work organizations like the National Association of Social Workers. We have a very large Colorado chapter that engages in a lot of lobbying and advocacy at the state capitol. We also find that a lot of our master's level folks are working in administrative roles in public systems as well. Our PhD students in large part are moving into academic positions, so pursuing tenure track positions, although occasionally we do have students that are more interested in like kind of that research think tank where they're wanting to produce science that is directly translated into practice and policy through those channels.
All right. Okay, now the last question I have for you then is, how can students learn more about your program? Should they be considering becoming a social worker?
It sounds like, Nate, thank you so much that you've already dropped into the Q&A the links to our degree program. So that's certainly a wonderful way to learn more about the School of Social Work. We have a wonderful website that has a lot of different great information on it that will tell you about the BSW, the MSW, and the PhDs in social work. I also just have to give a big shout out to my colleagues here in the school. I work with such a fabulous group of people. We are are out there in the community doing community engaged work, whether that's through research practice or policy advocacy. So if you find one of us, meet with one of us and learn more about the work that we do in the school. And then I also just want to give a shout out to an organization that I'm a part of called the Group for the Advancement of Doctoral Education in Social Work, or GAID. And we have a ton of different resources on our website, and I can drop that into the chat here as well, that talks to you about why you would get a PhD in social work or why you would get a DSW in social work. And I've been really enjoying my role in that organization. In fact, I'm actually running for the board president and should find out the results any day now, but I might be, anyway, but I'm excited about the work that we do in social work. And I don't think you'll find a person around our school that's not really enthusiastic about our profession and wanting to answer questions about what we do as social workers. Oftentimes, I think the work that we do is misunderstood, or that there are some, misunderstandings about what social work is and what we do. We do more than just work in child protective services, which is, I think, a common myth for our profession. We work in lots of different systems, doing lots of different things, and it's really an exciting profession to be a part of. And again, I think that common thread around social justice and promoting equity and inclusion is really such a driver of our profession. So if that interests you, come and talk to one of us.
Sounds great. Well, we do have a few questions in the Q&A, so let me read these for you. So, okay, the first one is, are there opportunities to fold in prevention coursework into the MSW program or the PhD program? If not, could this be a collaboration between HDFS and the School of Social Work in the future?
That's a great question. So I will say we've had several students take Nate's prevention science course, including I know one who's signed up for it already in the fall for our PhD program. Our PhD program is set up to allow a number of different elective courses, and oftentimes we find that our students are interested in the intersection between human development and social work. So they're taking courses in risk and resilience, they're taking your courses in prevention science. So there are those kinds of opportunities. However, I would be very interested in sitting down with Nate and really thinking about even some co-training and co-teaching opportunities. We've done, some collaborative work most recently with this project in Larimer County, Nate and I, but it's been a wonderful opportunity to get to know the work he's doing, and it's been exciting to think about how we might bring that kind of collaborative training model to our doctoral program.
Great. I would enjoy that conversation. All right. Another question we have is, what do you think are the gaps, if any, in the field of social work? It seems like social work does it all.
Oh, goodness. Well, that's a wonderful question. And please don't, yes, I think we're pretty awesome. I've been a social worker for 25 years and have loved every minute of it for the most part. But we are not without our challenges. So I think one of our challenges there's a couple that come to mind. That was a great question. One is that over the course, I would say, of the last 50 years, we've become so rooted in direct practice, which is wonderful because there's certainly a need to provide direct services to those who are experiencing suffering. And it's some in the field, and myself included, view this as a wonderful move. And yet in some ways, I think it's kind of made community practice take a little bit of a backseat. So our origins are really in that advocacy piece and really understanding systems and trying to create systems that can meet the needs of individuals and families, engaging in policy advocacy to fix unjust policies. And that part of our profession, I feel like, has been a bit marginalized in recent decades. And I think there's a resurgence, especially as we see social workers responding to some of the large social movements that are happening now, like the Black Lives Matter movement, climate change efforts, that we're kind of finding this reigniting of this passion around social justice, and the students that are coming into our programs are more invested, I think, in learning those advocacy skills. But one of the challenges, I think, is that we continue to kind of see where the intersection and sometimes the rub is between direct practice and community practice. So that's just one. I was actually at a conference for this doctoral group a couple weeks ago, and we had a fascinating presentation around the history of social work, and that we're kind of losing some some of our understandings as practitioners about some of the roots of social work and some of the ugly history of our profession of being actively involved in systems of oppression. So, for example, and maybe I'm airing too much of our whatever, but that we were actively involved in Japanese internment camps during World War II. And I, think that when we can't look backwards, then how do we look forward? And so this particular scholar was really issuing a call to action, particularly in doctoral training programs, to recognize where our history still comes into play, not only for understanding where we've been, but how in some ways we see that these systems of oppression, we are still perpetuating by being a part of them. So I'd say that's kind of two of the things that I think that we're really wrestling with as a profession. I know that as a nation, we've really been taken to task around understanding systems of oppression and where social injustice lies. And as a field, I think we have had some direct call outs by some of our students around where we still, are kind of recreating white supremacy within different institutions, where we're seeing inequities within our profession, and really seeking to dismantle those. And so I'm excited about these calls to action. I think we're responding to them. And I also think as a profession, like many, we have a long way to go.
Great, thank you for that. All right, so the next question I have for you is, aside from the risk and protective factors, how do you think prevention can fit into social work practitioners working in schools?
That's a great question. I mean, I think that, one of the most powerful ways, and I used to work in public schools myself when I was in practice, that I really found this not only risk and protective factor framework, but that social ecological thinking. So we're rooted in a system where we're serving children, and at the same time, we understand how important the family system is to that particular practice. And so understanding some of the tools that we have as social workers within public schools to engage families, to engage parents. We know that parents are sometimes not actively involved in their child's education. And so how do we create better opportunities and pathways for parents to become involved in the child's school, I think is really an interesting way to think about it. I also think that, again, coming back to this idea of social justice, that when we think about risk and protective factors, that we're not just thinking about some of the well-known risk factors like exposure to violence. That's an individual level risk factor we know that maps onto a lot of different behavioral health challenges for young people. But also what I was just referring to, this idea of elevating that to the systems level, thinking about experiences with racism and discrimination, with transphobia and homophobia, like how is that creating risk? And I think particularly in public schools, we have a lot of students who are not experiencing their school environment to be very inclusive. And so how do we bring that social work lens of social justice within public schools and really thinking about that being a set of risk that the school may have some direct responsibility to address? I hope that answers your question.
Yeah, but yeah, it sounded like it. Yeah, great. Okay, so yeah, your responses and your comments are really spurring a lot of really great questions here. So I'll try to keep up with them and relay them to you. Okay, here's one. Are there any prevention projects you're currently working on that we can hear about? Maybe if you'd like to, you could maybe even share with the audience our project with Larimer County.
Yeah, that'd be great. Yeah. So in the last couple months, I've been partnering with Nate and his team at the Prevention Research Center on a Larimer County-wide project with the 3 different school districts, really looking at how we bring prevention programming and practices and policies within these different districts. And so right now we're working with Poudre School District, Thompson School District, and Estes Park School District to, well, our current activity is really to understand the prevention landscape. So understand at the school level, what are schools already doing in this prevention space? In the fall, we'll transition into actually bringing a prevention program called the Blues program to address student substance misuse to a set of schools, particularly high schools within these districts, that's targeting particularly that behavioral health problem around misuse. And then also thinking about kind of as a broader systems level infrastructure piece, how we build out a prevention system within these districts. So what are the practices and policies across the district? How do we actually get people to have a common understanding of what prevention is, so that maybe we can have some greater consistency across the districts in terms of how they're approaching prevention practice and policy. So that's been really exciting, and particularly exciting to work with Nate and his team, and also in our local community to really try to promote prevention in our public schools. So that's been really cool. The other big project that I've had an opportunity to work on since coming to Colorado in 2017 is we've done a couple of different investigations of a high school-based intervention called Sources of Strength. It's a wellness promotion program that's been shown to help to prevent suicide and suicide risk. We've also investigated its impacts on violence. If we can get funded, we've got a proposal in development that we'd be looking to actually extend that program post-high school. So looking to develop some booster content that could be, distributed via text or via other technology that would just remind students that were exposed to this program in high school how they continue to engage these different sources of strength in times of distress. And so that's been a really exciting project. We've done some great evaluations here in Colorado and are really excited about extending that work. Oh, one last shout out. I have to give a shout out to another colleague that I'm working closely here with. And this is a program that we've been operating in a high school down in Denver, looking at actually seeking solutions to racial inequities in school outcomes. So really bringing together this human design thinking approach with some anti-racism training and thinking about how school stakeholders can come together to use these tools to address racial inequities in their school environment.
Oh, that's a lot. Thanks, Ann. It's great. It's great to hear all the really wonderful work that you're doing. I have a couple of related questions on policy and advocacy, so I'll combine those. These are so getting involved in policy and advocacy work seems intimidating. Do you have any suggestions on where to get started? And then the similar one is, how does prevention play into social work policy and advocacy?
Yeah, those are great questions. To start with, I remember when I was first being trained in social work 25 years ago, I was really overwhelmed with the idea of community practice. The idea that I could somehow use my voice for social change felt extremely intimidating to me. And I, always talk to my students about that policy advocacy or community advocacy, social change efforts are really a broad set of activities. So I think we oftentimes think about, sitting down at the State House and providing testimony at a legislative hearing. In my career, I've only done that a handful of times, and really only in the last couple of years that I've been doing this thing for a long time. So thinking about how might I get involved in a coalition in my neighborhood? How might I get involved in partnering with other like-minded individuals to understand what's going on in our community? Do you have an opportunity to participate in a letter writing campaign? Voting, just go out and vote every November, or every time we have a special election. That's a way to engage in social change and in advocacy. So I think one of the ways in which I help my students understand how to get involved is really to get involved in a lot of different ways. There's not just one way to be involved in social advocacy, and it has to be in a way that makes sense for where you are in your life, what skills you want to bring to the table. But the biggest thing is just get involved with other people to understand what's happening in your community, and that oftentimes leads to more active involvement in social change. But in terms of prevention science, so I can share actually one example. A couple of years ago, a colleague and I, who used to be with the school, and now is with Poudre Schools, we had the opportunity to partner with a state legislator who was really interested in expanding mental health services in public schools. And so we were able to, along with other like-minded individuals, come together and help to support a particular bill that she was trying to pass through committee to expand social work and other mental health services in schools. So that was really an exciting opportunity to bring some prevention kind of fundamentals to this conversation around expanding mental health. And we didn't just mean more intensive services, but also, how do we think about universal prevention programming as a means to promote student mental health. And then after actually one of the many school shootings that we've had here in Colorado a few years ago, gosh, why am I drawing a blank on the school's name? Anyway, it was a few years ago, there was a legislative task force that was put together around understanding school safety. And I, along with other school social workers, the National Association for Social Workers, and all different kinds of folks in public health were asked to come and testify at this particular task force hearing around what works to prevent school shootings. And we talked a lot about moving away from these models around having school resource officers or more police in schools, arming our teachers. We haven't seen much evidence those solutions work. So how do we actually better support student mental health, teachers' ability to manage their classrooms, bringing more supports for families in the school system? So bringing that broad prevention lens into that conversation, I thought was a really interesting and exciting opportunity to be a part of that, at least at the state level. The STEM shooting, was that the name of the school? Gosh, why that's bugging me, I can't think of it.
Well, that's great. I didn't know that you were that involved with policy and advocacy, and I'm just starting to kind of dip my toes into that. And the person who put the question into the Q&A is right. At first, it can feel really intimidating when you have an audience of staffers and legislators and the like. And but after a while, you kind of get used to it, and you realize that you're the expert in the room on the topic, and it can be a really gratifying experience in many ways. So
yeah. And don't misunderstand, I was very nervous. So as many times as I presented, that was one of the most, I think, anxiety provoking presentations. But you're right, that I had an expertise and also a passion that I could bring to this conversation, and that I think it's a really critical way that we think about that translation piece, that we have science that is oftentimes underutilized in the policymaking process. And so how do we get it to the hands of people who are actually legislating? And so that can be through white papers, that can be through testimony, that can be through other forms of advocacy. But it's been really exciting and relatively new and a longer career that I've had, that I've been able to have those opportunities.
Yeah, that's great. Okay, so this is the final question that we currently have in the Q&A. So if you have any burning questions, get those fingers typing. All right, so what experience informed advice do you have for someone interested in merging social work and prevention science in their career?
That's a great question. I think that, it kind of depends on the discipline in which you've been trained in. So if you've been trained in prevention science, what are the lessons learned from social work that might be useful? One thing I would recommend is this, kind of intersection between direct practice and community practice, as I've been talking about, understanding more about social justice and how systems of oppression can be, reimagined or dismantled. So that's kind of that's the one-way street from prevention science to social work. But I think on the flip side, this is what I've been trying to do through our coalition work. As Nate mentioned, I'm a part of a workforce development task force where we've tried to create modules that classroom instructors and social work and allied disciplines can use that train around the fundamentals of prevention science, how prevention principles can be used, whether we're working directly with a family, whether we're working in community systems. And so really trying to understand what is prevention science and how might it be infused into the work I'm doing, even if I'm in a system, again, that's not really primed for that type of work. So using prevention principles, for example, in my own class a few weeks ago with our MSW students, I was teaching community practice, and we were talking about coalition building. And I was talking about how we could use prevention principles, like through Communities That Care or Prosper, these other prevention systems, to help inform bringing people together to help to prevent behavioral health problems among young people. And for some of my students, that was not a new concept, this idea of upstream efforts versus downstream efforts. But for some of my students, it felt like a light bulb to them to really think about that there is this opportunity, even when, say, I'm working as a child protective worker with a family who's had a child removed, I can still think from a preventative standpoint in terms of what's going to help that child and maybe prevent an escalation of issues that child is experiencing. What might help this family in terms of maybe supporting reunification. So really thinking about those prevention principles and those foundations being kind of maybe more central to the practice that you do, no matter what system you're working in.
All right, well, I, for one, have really enjoyed making that connection between prevention science and social work and working with you. And I really appreciate your willingness to spend some time with us all today. That is all we have for you today, everybody. And thanks again, Anne, Dr. Williford, for your time. And thanks to the audience for joining. Just an FYI, you all will be able to find this and other episodes of the Prevention Extension Cast on the Prevention Research Center's website. I dropped the link to that in the chat. And please feel free to either contact us at prevention@colorado-state.edu or Anne. I'm sure she'd be willing to connect with you. I took the liberty of dropping your bio in the Q&A. For folks to be able to connect with you if they would like to. So with that, I'd like to say have a great day, everybody, and take care. It's been a pleasure.